So we are going to be reviewing cross-hatching. And as you know, cross-hatching is a form of shading where you cross directions in which you're shading. If you have a small object like this flower here, then you should try to cross-hatch around it instead of inside of it. You know, like the background would be a good option to cross-hatch in, because if you try to cross-hatch inside small objects, then you could risk losing your detail or having it look sloppy. If you need to erase and clean up the edges, go ahead and be careful to not smudge when you're wiping away your eraser shavings. Now we are going to cross-hatch inside a larger object, like this flower here, and I'm just going to do an even tone all the way across the petal. Feel free to go around the edges in whatever direction you'd like to make sure that you're coloring inside the lines. Now I'm going to do a gradient cross-hatching where the outer edge is lighter, and I just demonstrated how to hold your pencil when you're trying to draw light. Make sure you're holding it all the way back at the end of the eraser. You can do as many layers as you want when cross-hatching, but the more layers that you do, the darker your cross-hatching and color of your shading will be. So now I'm going to do just a flat tone of really light cross-hatching. Again, feel free to trace around the edges in any direction you want to make sure that your cross-hatching fits inside your object within the lines nice and neatly. Now this is what you should not do when you're trying to crosshatch. Technically this is crosshatching, but it's very sloppy and effortless. So you need to still put a good amount of effort into your shading and when you're filling in objects. So here is the last petal that I'm demonstrating with crosshatching. A very light crosshatching layer. One option to make your drawings look nice and neat is to outline with a marker. I suggest, if you're using pencil for your shading, to outline in a Sharpie, a fine point Sharpie. Actually, ultra fine point is the best, the one that I'm using right now. And the normal Sharpie is called fine point. And then there's one that's even thicker than that. So you can see it says fine point and ultra fine point. And that's the difference between the two tips. So that's if you want it to look a little bit more animated and cartoon-like. But if you want it realistic, you don't have to outline. So next I'm going to be demonstrating how to cross-hatch using a crayon. I like these crayon twist-up pencils because it lets you use a more narrow tip with your crayon so that you can get into smaller areas. Again, you want to go around smaller objects. So if you know you want to cross-hatch and you have smaller objects, I do not suggest cross-hatching inside the smaller objects. Instead, the background would be a great option. And here I have a larger object. So I'm going to go ahead and cross-hatch inside my larger objects. Now I'm going to practice a gradient cross-hatch. It's going to be darker towards the inside of the petal and lighter towards the outside of the petal. When you're cross-hatching, you should not see any huge white spaces poking through your shading. It should be a nice flat shading with texture. So you will see the little crisscrosses, but that does not mean that you see white shining through from your paper. Everything should be covered when you're cross-hatching. Okay, now this is what not to do again. So do not cross-hatch like this when you're using crayons. It looks sloppy and there are a lot of white squares and white pieces of the paper shining through. So here is another example of a flat toned cross-hatching shaded petal. And now I'm going in with a blue marker to outline my flower. Again, outlining is usually for only if you want a cartoonish animated look. If you want it to be more realistic, then you do not have to outline with marker. Just make sure that those edges are defined in another way. So now we're going to use colored pencil to crosshatch. And colored pencil is a weird mix between the bright colors of crayon and the smooth blending of pencil. So you can see that it's a little bit creamier. And I'm going around my small object. And then now I'm going to shade inside a larger object. So I'm starting again with a flat wash of color, cross-hatching in the other direction. I'm going in to touch up those edges in any direction that I want. I can trace along those edges. Make sure you color inside the lines. And now I'm going to do a gradient cross-hatching. So the inner part of the petal is going to be a little bit darker than the outside part of the petal. Make sure you blend that evenly with your shading. And now I'm cross-hatching and fixing up the edges. Now I'm going to do an opposite gradient where the outside of the petal is a little bit darker than the inside. So I'm starting very light, holding my pencil towards the outer edge of the pencil where the eraser would be. Okay, now I'm doing a second layer. So this would be where I cross in the opposite direction. Now I'm fixing the edges, and this is what you should not do with colored pencil. Technically it is cross-hatching, but it looks sloppy. So please do not leave the whites of your paper exposed. You should cover your entire paper when you're shading with cross-hatching. And now I'm going to outline in a marker. I think I'm going to use gray this time. And just a side note, you should never crosshatch using marker. Marker is for outlining. It will look very streaky if you try to crosshatch using marker. I hope these tips help.